I'm Claire Anderson, 29, and 6 years ago, I begged my parents to stay as I was wheeled into emergency spinal surgery, terrified I'd never walk again. They chose my sister's graduation instead. I woke up alone scrolling through photos of their smiles while I learned to stand again on shaking legs with no one there. Now she's walked into the hospital where I'm chief resident broke and desperate asking me to save her. She thinks I will. But family betrayal cuts deeper than any scalpel I've ever held. And karma. It has a strange way of visiting the places you least expect. If you've ever felt forgotten by your own family, hit like, subscribe, and stay till the end to see how this story unfolds. I remember that morning like it was yesterday. I was 7 living in our small house in Denver, Colorado. My mom had promised me we would go to the local ice cream shop with 5 of my friends. I had picked out a small chocolate cake and I was wearing a blue dress I loved. Then Sophie started crying. She was 5 standing in the kitchen, tears rolling down her cheeks, begging to go to the water park instead. She said she didn't want to sit in an ice cream shop because it was boring. She wanted the slides, the splash, the sun. My mom knelt beside her, stroking her hair, whispering, "Sweetie, don't cry. We can go if you want." I stood there holding the party hats in my hand, watching as my dad picked up the phone to cancel the ice cream shop. He called every parent apologizing, telling them we would reschedule. I didn't say a word, just held the hats tighter, the cheap elastic bands cutting into my fingers. We ended up at the water park that day. Sophie ran ahead screaming with laughter, dragging my mom behind her. My dad bought her cotton candy, letting it melt in her small hands as she skipped around in her new swimsuit. I sat under an umbrella, the sun hot on my skin, eating a peanut butter sandwich because the cake was left at home. No one asked if I was okay. That was the first time I felt it. The quiet understanding that Sophie's happiness mattered more than mine. That my job, even on my birthday, was to smile while she smiled. My mom told me later that night as she tucked me in, "I hope you had a good day, honey. It's important to make your sister happy." When I turned 13, it was the same. Sophie wanted to join a summer art camp, an expensive one out of state. My parents sat me down in the living room telling me they needed to use the money I had been saving for a science camp. "It would mean so much to your sister," my dad said, holding my mom's hand, looking at me like I was supposed to understand. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, and told them it was okay. The next morning I took on a job at the local library shelving books after school. I worked in silence, pushing carts, counting the hours so I could save enough to buy the biology kit I wanted. I watched Sophie leave with new suitcases, hugging my parents at the airport, her hair tied with a bright yellow ribbon, talking about how she was going to become a famous artist. When she came back, the house was filled with her stories. She painted all over the dining room table, leaving brushes and water cups everywhere. My mom called her creative, my dad called her brilliant. I watched them hang her paintings in the hallway next to their wedding photos. I never told them that I cried the day she left, sitting on the back porch holding the camp brochure I had circled with red ink, dreaming about the labs and the microscopes. I never told them how I tore it up that night, piece by piece, letting the wind take it away. I studied quietly, keeping my grades perfect, keeping my head down. Sophie grew louder, brighter, filling every room she walked into, always asking for more, always getting it. She would take my hairbrush, my clothes, my notebooks, and when I asked for them back, she would pout, saying, "Don't be mean, Claire. Sharing is what sisters do." And every time my parents would tell me, "Let her have it, Claire. She's your sister," I nodded every time. Because I was the responsible one. Because they said I was strong enough to handle it. Because they said Sophie needed it more. I kept my head down, letting Sophie shine while I folded into the background. She was 15 when she decided she wanted to join a dance team. It was expensive: uniforms, travel fees, shoes, and private lessons. My parents sat at the kitchen table one evening, bills stacked between them, whispering about how to make it work. I had a small jar in my closet filled with crumpled bills and coins saved from tutoring kids in algebra and babysitting for the neighbors. I had been planning to buy a used laptop for AP biology projects. My mom found it one morning while putting away laundry. She came to my room, jar in her hand, smiling softly. "Sophie has a real chance with this, Claire," she said. I just looked at the jar, then at her, trying to find the words to say no. But I didn't. "Okay," I whispered. That evening, I watched Sophie twirl in the living room wearing the new dance shoes my jar had bought her, giggling as she tried new routines. She pulled me from the couch, forcing me to spin with her, her laughter echoing while I tried to match her steps. My mom clapped, tears in her eyes, saying, "Look at our beautiful girls." But later, when I was alone, I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the empty space where my dreams used to live. Sophie's competitions became the center of every weekend. Early morning drives, packed lunches, loud music blasting while she fixed her makeup in the passenger seat mirror. I stayed home most weekends, catching up on schoolwork, cleaning the house before they returned with fast food bags and tired smiles. At night, I heard them laughing in the kitchen, retelling stories from the competitions while I tried to study in my room, the walls too thin to block out the noise. One evening I came out to get water and found Sophie sitting on the counter swinging her legs, telling our dad about how a judge complimented her on her energy. She saw me, eyes bright. "Claire, you should have been there." It was so fun. I forced a smile, nodding, "I'm glad it went well." She slid off the counter and hugged me, suddenly her hair smelling like cheap hairspray and vanilla lotion. "You're the best sister," she mumbled. I closed my eyes, holding her loosely, wishing I could believe that meant something. Years passed like that. I worked, I studied, I saved. Sophie laughed, danced, posted photos with friends, complaining when she didn't get the newest phone, demanding to be driven to parties. My parents complied, saying she was special, that she deserved it. When I got my acceptance letter to the University of Washington, I held it in shaking hands, reading the words over and over. I ran into the kitchen, waving the letter, unable to hide the grin splitting across my face. My parents smiled, said they were proud, then glanced at Sophie, who was scrolling on her phone. "That's great, honey," my mom said, but her voice was distracted. Sophie sighed loudly. "Mom, can we go shopping for the winter formal dress tomorrow?" My dad glanced at me, then at Sophie. "We'll figure it out." I folded the letter, hiding it in my pocket, nodding like always. I graduated high school with honors, but the celebration was small, a dinner at a cheap diner because Sophie had a dance recital the next morning and we couldn't stay out late. I wore the new dress I had saved for sitting in the booth while they checked the time, reminding me we needed to leave soon. That night, I lay in bed, diploma on the nightstand, Sophie's makeup bag open on the floor where she'd left it, her shoes kicked under my bed. I stared at the ceiling again, wondering if this was just how it was meant to be. Because every time Sophie wanted something, I became invisible. Every time she smiled, my silence became the price they were willing to pay. But I kept going. I packed my bags for college, hugging them goodbye in the driveway. My mom whispered, "Take care of yourself, Claire," while Sophie stood behind her, pouting, complaining she would miss her ride to meet friends. I watched them drive away, dust kicking up on the road as I held the strap of my suitcase tighter. I didn't know then, standing alone with the early morning sun burning my skin, that all of this, all the birthdays and dance recitals and small silences, were only the beginning. I didn't know the worst was still waiting for me, wrapped in hospital sheets and sharp pain, in a moment when I would need them the most and they would choose her again. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, my parents would finally be proud of me. At the University of Washington, I lived in a tiny dorm with a squeaky bed and a shared bathroom that smelled like bleach. My roommate Jenna loved blasting music while getting ready for parties, curling her hair in front of the cracked mirror while I studied on my bed with earplugs in. Every morning I woke before the sun, jogging across campus to the library, holding coffee and shaking hands, reading anatomy notes under the harsh fluorescent lights. I kept a spreadsheet on my laptop, tracking every dollar spent, every hour worked at the campus bookstore, every grade from every quiz. Scholarships covered most of my tuition, but rent and food were on me. I learned how to stretch rice and canned beans into a week of meals. I drank free coffee from the library and kept granola bars in my backpack for the long days in labs. Sophie would call sometimes, her voice light and carefree. "Claire, I'm thinking about dropping communications," she said one afternoon while I sat on the cold steps outside the science building. "Why?" I asked, shifting my phone to the other ear, the wind biting my face. "It's boring. I think I want to do fashion. Or maybe start a YouTube channel." I pressed my fingers to my eyes, exhaustion heavy in my bones. "What about finishing your degree?" Sophie sighed dramatically. "You're so serious, Claire." "Mom and Dad said they'll help while I figure it out." I swallowed the bitterness, forcing my voice steady. Okay, just don't waste your classes. She laughed, brushing me off. Relax, big sis. Not everyone wants to bury themselves in books. She hung up before I could respond. I sat there, phone cold in my hand, watching students walk past with headphones, laughing with friends, holding hands, living lives that seemed lighter than mine. I tried to ignore the ache that had started in my lower back, a dull throb that worsened on the days I stood too long during labs or sat hunched over my textbooks. I stretched, did yoga in the mornings, telling myself it was just stress. During Thanksgiving, I went home to Denver. The house smelled like cinnamon, and Sophie was decorating the tree, snapping selfies for Instagram, pouting her lips while Mom adjusted the lights. I stood there in my worn jeans, hair tied back, watching them, feeling like a stranger in my own family. At dinner, Sophie complained about how hard life was, how she needed a new phone because hers was outdated, how her friends were going to Cancun for spring break and she didn't want to miss out. Mom nodded, saying, "We'll see what we can do, honey." I stared at my plate, cutting my turkey into tiny pieces, ignoring the stabbing pain in my lower back. After dinner, as we washed dishes, Mom turned to me. "Claire, you're doing so well. We're proud," she said, but her eyes were on Sophie, who was dancing around the kitchen filming a TikTok. "Thanks," I whispered, scrubbing the dishes harder, trying to ignore the way my back burned with every movement. When I returned to campus, winter settled in, the cold seeping into my bones. The pain in my back grew sharper, spreading down my legs, making it hard to sit through lectures. I started taking ibuprofen, then stronger painkillers, swallowing them between classes, forcing myself to keep going. One evening, Jenna looked up from her laptop, watching me limp to my bed. "Claire, you need to see a doctor," she said, concern in her eyes. "I'm fine," I lied, pulling my blanket around me, teeth clenched as another wave of pain shot through me. "You're not fine," she argued. "You can barely walk." "I can't afford to be sick, Jenna. I can't lose my scholarship." She fell silent, shaking her head, turning back to her screen as I closed my eyes, trying to breathe through the pain that never seemed to leave. The pain became part of me, a quiet shadow that followed every step. In the mornings, I moved slowly, brushing my teeth with one hand on the counter, waiting for the burning ache in my lower back to ease enough to stand up straight. At the bookstore, I shifted from foot to foot while ringing up customers, gripping the counter when the pain shot down my leg like lightning. At night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, clutching a heating pad to my back, counting the hours until morning, until I could swallow another pill and keep going. Mom would call, her voice bright. "How's school, honey?" "It's good, Mom," I'd say, forcing my voice steady. "That's my girl." "Sophie's thinking about taking a break from classes, maybe traveling for a bit. She's so stressed." I pressed the phone against my ear, closing my eyes. "Yeah. Sounds fun. She's been working hard, you know. Social media isn't easy." I bit my lip until I tasted blood, forcing myself to whisper, "I know, Mom." After we hung up, I lay there, letting silent tears slide into my hair, the pain in my back pulsing in time with my heartbeat. During labs, I gripped the edge of the table when the pain spiked, hoping no one noticed. I refused to miss a single class, terrified that if I fell behind, I would lose everything I'd worked for. "You okay?" Jenna asked one afternoon as I staggered back from the bathroom, my face pale. "Yeah," I lied, sitting down, slowly breathing through clenched teeth. "You need to see a doctor," she said again, her eyes worried. "I can't afford it," I snapped before I could stop myself. She went quiet, turning away, and guilt twisted in my chest. The day I finally saw a doctor was the day I couldn't stand up in the shower, sinking to the floor with the water pounding on my back, hot and useless. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and cheap coffee. I sat in a hard chair, clutching the paperwork, my hands shaking. The doctor was kind but serious, explaining the MRI results in simple terms. "A herniated disc, Claire. You've been pushing yourself too hard for too long." I swallowed, staring at the scan on the screen. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice small. "We can try physical therapy and pain management, but if it gets worse, you may need surgery." "Surgery." The word echoed in my head as I left the clinic, the cold air slapping my face, the weight of the diagnosis heavier than my backpack. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Sophie. I didn't want to hear them say, "You'll be fine," while Sophie complained about her followers dropping because she didn't post enough. Instead, I kept going. I took the pills, I did the stretches. I went to class, to work, to the library. I smiled at customers, took notes in lectures, held my breath when the pain became too much, refusing to let it break me. Because if I stopped, I would lose my scholarship. Because if I stopped, I would disappoint them. Because if I stopped, I would have nothing. But one winter afternoon, as snow fell outside the window, turning the world white and quiet, I reached for my backpack, and the pain exploded so sharply I couldn't even scream. I collapsed to the floor, the room spinning, my vision going black at the edges, as I gasped for air, unable to move, unable to call for help. The pain roared, drowning out everything else. And in that moment, lying on the cold floor of my tiny dorm, I realized I couldn't get up. I tried to move, but the pain snapped through my spine like a live wire. I gasped, clutching at the floor, my fingernails scraping against the cold linoleum as I tried to pull myself toward my phone on the bed. Every inch felt like knives digging deeper, my vision swimming as I dragged my body across the floor. I reached the bed frame, pulling down the blanket, letting the phone tumble onto the ground. My fingers shook as I unlocked it, dialing 911 with tears blurring the screen. "My name is Claire Anderson," I whispered, barely able to breathe. "I can't move. My back. I need help." The dispatcher's calm voice kept me conscious, telling me to stay with her, to breathe, to keep talking. I could hear the sirens before I saw the red and blue lights flashing through the window, the snow still falling, quiet and indifferent. Paramedics pounded on the door, and Jenna opened it, her eyes wide with fear. I saw her hand fly to her mouth as she saw me on the floor, unable to do anything but cry, as they lifted me onto the stretcher. In the ambulance, the pain was everywhere, radiating down my legs, turning the world into flashes of agony and the smell of antiseptic. I stared at the ceiling, clutching the blanket, praying I wouldn't pass out. At the ER, the bright lights hurt my eyes as doctors moved around me, their voices calm but urgent. "Severe herniation with fragments compressing the spinal cord," one said. "She needs emergency surgery," another added, glancing down at me. "Sweetheart, we need to operate soon, or you could lose movement in your legs." I nodded, the tears rolling into my hair. "Is there someone we can call?" a nurse asked gently. "My parents," I whispered. "Please call my parents." They handed me my phone. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it as I found Mom's contact and pressed call. She answered on the third ring, her voice bright. "Claire, honey, we're just finishing packing for L.A. Mom," I choked, gasping. "I'm in the hospital. They say I need emergency spinal surgery. I need you here. Please." There was a pause, too long, too cold. "Oh, Claire," she said, her voice soft. "You know, tomorrow is Sophie's graduation." "Mom, please," I sobbed, the monitors beeping faster as my heart raced. "They said I could lose my legs. Please, I need you here. I can't miss this, honey. It's the most important day of Sophie's life. We'll come right after, okay?" The line went silent as I struggled to breathe. "Mom, I'm scared." "You're strong, Claire," she said, her voice fading. "Sophie needs us tomorrow." She hung up. I stared at the screen. The call ended, my reflection shaking in the black glass. Then Sophie called. "Are you serious right now?" she snapped, her voice sharp, cutting through my tears. "You're really going to pull this during my graduation weekend?" "Sophie," I gasped, "I didn't choose this. I can't move. They say I could lose my legs. This is so typical of you," she hissed. "You always have to be the center of attention. You can't let me have one day." I tried to respond, but she had already hung up. I dropped the phone, letting it clatter to the floor, the sound echoing in the sterile room. The nurse came back, adjusting the IV, her eyes kind as she wiped the tears from my face. "It's going to be okay, honey," she whispered, but in that moment, I didn't believe it. I turned my face toward the wall, feeling the cold air sting my skin as I struggled to breathe. The scent of antiseptic filled my nose, mixing with the salty taste of tears on my lips. The nurse tucked the blanket around me, her hands gentle. I could hear the plastic rustle as she adjusted the IV line again, the beep of the monitor matching the rapid beat of my heart. "You're young, you're strong," she said softly. "You'll get through this." I didn't answer. I didn't feel strong. Outside, I heard the muffled voices of nurses changing shifts, the squeak of shoes against the floor. Life moved on around me while I lay there staring at the crack in the ceiling tile, wondering if this was how everything would end. My phone buzzed again on the floor, a soft vibration against the tile. I reached for it with trembling fingers, wincing as pain shot down my spine. It was a text from Dad. "Your mom and I will call after the ceremony. Be brave, be brave." 2 words that felt like a slap. My thumb hovered over the screen as I typed back. "Please. I need you here." I hit send and stared, waiting for the dots to appear for a sign that they were reading understanding. Nothing. I lay back, the phone slipping from my grasp, sliding under the edge of the bed. The nurse returned with another nurse, a man this time, his expression calm but focused. "Hi Claire. I'm Jason. We need to get you ready for surgery," he said, checking my chart. "I'm scared," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I know," he said, nodding. "But you're in good hands. We're going to take care of you." They began prepping me, removing the blankets, checking the IV sites, placing sensors on my chest. The cold gel made me flinch and the monitor spiked the beep loud in the room. I heard them speaking softly above me, medical terms blending into a blur as I stared at the ceiling, tears sliding down the sides of my face into my hair. The door opened and a doctor in blue scrubs walked in, holding a clipboard. "Claire, I'm Dr. Patel. I'll be assisting in your surgery," he said with a reassuring smile. I tried to smile back, but my lips wouldn't move. "Do you have any family here with you?" he asked gently. I shook my head, feeling the shame burn in my chest. "They couldn't make it," I managed to say, swallowing hard. His eyes softened for a moment before he nodded. "We'll take good care of you," he promised. They began to wheel me out of the room, the ceiling lights passing above me in sharp white lines. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps, my hands gripping the sides of the gurney. The hallway smelled of bleach and something metallic, the sounds of machines and voices blending together, a dull roar in my ears. As we reached the surgical wing, I saw a nurse step aside, holding the door open. I caught a glimpse of a family standing in the hallway, hugging and crying, their arms around each other. A mother pressed her hand to her child's cheek, whispering something, kissing their forehead. A sharp ache stabbed through me, deeper than the pain in my back. My mother should have been there. My father should have been there. But they were hundreds of miles away, smiling for photos, clapping for Sophie. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the image, trying to push away the loneliness that wrapped around me like ice. They pushed me into the OR, the lights bright and harsh, the air colder than before. Machines beeped, nurses moved quickly, checking equipment, calling out numbers. Someone took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You're going to be okay," the nurse whispered again. I opened my eyes, blinking against the lights, my vision blurring as tears filled them again. The anesthesiologist leaned over me, his eyes kind behind his mask. "Count backward from 10 for me, Claire," he said. I took a deep breath, the smell of the mask sharp and chemical. 10, 9, 8. My voice trembled, my mind filled with the image of Sophie in her cap and gown, mom and dad beside her smiling. 7, 6, 5. The lights above me faded into white as I prayed silently that I would wake up again, that I would walk again, even if I had to do it alone. I woke to the sound of a machine beeping, steady and loud, matching the pounding in my head. My eyes fluttered open, the harsh white lights above me blurring as tears filled them. I tried to move, but pain shot through my spine, sharp and burning, locking me in place. A groan slipped from my lips, barely a sound, but enough for someone to notice. Hey, easy now," a soft voice said. A woman leaned over me, brown hair tied back, tired eyes that somehow still held warmth. Her name tag read Emily Carter, RN. "You're in recovery, Claire. You did it. You're out of surgery," she said, squeezing my hand gently. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, raw, as if I'd swallowed glass. Emily reached for a cup, lifted a straw to my lips. "Small sips," she whispered. Water dripped onto my tongue, cold and metallic, but it was something. I swallowed, feeling it burn down my throat, my body trembling as pain rippled through me. 7 hours, Emily said, softly brushing hair from my forehead. "It was a long surgery, but you made it." I blinked, trying to process her words, the lights above me spinning slightly as nausea rose. "Hurts," I managed to whisper, tears leaking from the corners of my eyes. "I know, honey. I know, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I've got you. She adjusted something on the IV, and a cold wave moved through my arm, the pain dulling slightly but not leaving. The beeping of the monitor steadied, and for a moment all I could do was lie there breathing, trying to stay conscious, afraid to slip back into darkness. Is there anyone you want me to call for you? Emily asked, her hand still wrapped around mine. I closed my eyes, feeling the sting behind my eyelids. My parents, I whispered, my voice breaking. Are they here? Emily's face shifted, her lips pressing together before she spoke. I don't see anyone in the waiting area for you, Claire. Something inside me cracked, a quiet, invisible break that hurt more than the stitches in my back. Okay, I whispered. She squeezed my hand again, her thumb brushing over my skin, grounding me in the moment. You're not alone, okay, I'm here, she said. I nodded slightly, but inside I felt emptier than I ever had before. Hours passed, the clock on the wall ticking in slow, heavy minutes as nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting machines, speaking in soft tones. At some point, Emily helped me hold my phone, placing it carefully in my trembling hands. Take your time, she said, stepping back to give me space. With shaking fingers, I opened social media, the screen bright in the dim room. Notifications exploded across the screen, photos loading one by one. There it was. A picture of Sophie in her blue cap and gown, smiling, wide arms thrown around Mom and Dad. Balloons in the background, sunlight pouring over them, their faces bright with joy. The caption read, "Proud parents. Best day ever." My breath caught in my throat, the pain in my back drowned out by the ache in my chest. My thumb hovered over the screen, tracing their smiles. I felt Emily's eyes on me, and when I looked up, she was watching, her face soft with understanding. They look happy, she said quietly, her voice careful. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even nod. A single tear rolled down my cheek, landing on the phone screen, smudging the picture. I placed the phone on the bed, turning my head to stare at the wall, the monitors beeping, the only sound in the room. My chest rose and fell, each breath a reminder that I was still here alone while they were there celebrating without me. The tears wouldn't stop, no matter how hard I tried to blink them away. Emily came back with a warm blanket, gently covering me, tucking it around my shoulders. Her kindness made the emptiness sharper. You're safe now, she whispered, smoothing my hair back. I wanted to believe her, but every breath felt heavy, pressing against the raw wound inside me. I tried to shift, pain lancing through my spine, forcing a cry from my lips. Emily's hands flew to my arm, steadying me. Don't move, sweetheart. Let your body heal. I nodded, biting down hard, tasting blood, trying to swallow the sob that threatened to rise. My phone buzzed on the tray beside me, screen lighting up with a call from Mom. My heart jumped, hope rising before I could stop it. Emily handed me the phone and I pressed it to my ear, careful, desperate. Hi, Mom, I whispered, voice cracking. Oh, honey, there you are. Her voice was bright, too bright, like sunshine I couldn't reach. I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me, waiting for her to ask if I was okay, if I was alive, if I was in pain. We're just leaving Sophie's graduation lunch. It was beautiful, Claire. She looked so happy. The words sliced through me, sharp and cold. That's great. I managed, breath shuddering. There was laughter in the background, Sophie's voice. Dad's deep chuckle. Plates clinked, people chatting, the sounds of a life I was not part of. We took so many pictures, Mom continued, her voice distant now. I'll send them to you later. I swallowed hard, blinking at the ceiling, the white lights blurring again. Okay, I whispered. Well, we have to head to the dinner now, but we'll call you tomorrow, okay? Rest up, sweetheart. Yeah, I said, the words small, empty. The call ended, the line going dead, and I let the phone slip from my fingers, landing softly on the bed. Emily stood there, her eyes wet, lips pressed tight as she took the phone and set it aside. I'm so sorry, Claire, she whispered, her voice breaking. I turned my head, tears rolling down, soaking into the pillow, my body shaking with silent sobs I couldn't hold back. Emily sat down, holding my hand again, letting me cry without saying another word. The machines beeped steadily, the sound almost comforting in its consistency. I tried to breathe, pulling in shallow, painful breaths, each one reminding me that I had survived. But it didn't feel like living. Minutes passed, maybe hours, the sky outside turning from gray to the dark blue of evening. I could see the reflection of the hospital lights in the window, the world outside moving on while I lay there unable to move. Emily adjusted my IV, checking the monitors moving with quiet efficiency. She glanced at me, forcing a small smile. "You're stronger than you think, Claire," she said. I wanted to believe her, but all I could see was that picture of them smiling, happy, living a day they would remember forever. A day I would remember for an entirely different reason. The pain in my back pulsed sharp and deep, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness take me for a moment, wishing it could swallow the hurt, the loneliness, the betrayal. But even in the dark, I saw their faces laughing, celebrating without me. And in that moment, I finally understood. I had never been their priority. 6 years passed, and I rebuilt my life piece by fragile piece. The hospital halls became my second home, the sharp scent of antiseptic, a constant companion. I rose before dawn, stayed late, learned every procedure, every nuance, every sign of fear in a patient's eyes. St. Mary's Hospital in Boston became my fortress, the place where I proved every day that I mattered, that I could save lives even if no one had cared enough to be there when I almost lost mine. Dr. Hayes, my attending, nodded with quiet approval when I handled a complicated spinal decompression last week. He trusted me, gave me responsibilities that others only dreamed of. "Good work, Dr. Anderson," he said, eyes steady, voice firm, a rare smile on his face. Those words meant more to me than any birthday gift, any family praise I had never received. I thought I had finally found peace, a rhythm in my days that kept the ghosts away. Until the email from HR arrived that morning. "New hire orientation today, Dr. Anderson," the email read. "Patient Experience Coordinator Sophie Anderson." My fingers froze on the keyboard, the world around me blurring, the air thick, heavy. Sophie. The last time I saw her, she was in a white dress, cap and gown, throwing her hat in the air, smiling into the camera while I lay in a hospital bed, learning how to walk again. I forced my breath steady, closing my eyes, gripping the edge of the desk until the shaking stopped. A knock on my office door snapped me back. "Come in," I managed, my voice calm, practiced. The door opened, and there she was, standing in front of me as if no time had passed, her hair perfectly curled, makeup flawless, that same bright, easy smile on her face. "Claire," she exclaimed, stepping forward like she belonged there. I stayed seated, watching her, every muscle in my body tense, the air electric with the ghosts of old wounds. "Hi, Sophie," I said, voice even. She looked around my office, her eyes scanning the awards, the framed photo with Dr. Hayes, the plaques on the wall. "Wow, this is nice," she said, flicking her hair over her shoulder. "You've done well." I didn't reply, just studied her, the way she stood there, confident, as if the years hadn't left a trail of shattered pieces in me. "So," she said, dropping into the chair across from me without asking, "I guess we're going to be working together now." I blinked, holding my composure, the words heavy on my tongue, unsaid. She leaned forward, lowering her voice, trying to sound sweet. "Look, Claire, I know we've had stuff. But this is a fresh start, right? We're family. I need this job. Let's help each other, family." That word felt like acid. I nodded slowly, the hum of the hospital outside my door steady, reminding me who I had become. "Let's see how it goes," I replied quietly. Sophie grinned, like it was settled, like I had welcomed her back. She stood up, smoothing her blouse, grabbing her designer bag. "Great, I'll see you around, okay?" She left as quickly as she came, the scent of her perfume lingering, mixing with the sterile air. I sat there staring at the door, the memory of the hospital bed, the cold, the pain, the emptiness crashing back over me. Sophie had no idea how I survived that surgery, how I learned to walk again alone. And now she had walked right back into the only safe place I had left. I didn't sleep that night, lying in bed with the city lights flickering against my ceiling. The hospital was quiet after midnight, but my mind wasn't. I kept seeing her face, the way she smiled, the way she walked in like she owned the room, like she hadn't left me alone, like she hadn't called me selfish on the worst day of my life. My alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. I got up, showered, pulled on my scrubs, and tied my hair back tight, letting the steam and hot water burn away the heaviness in my chest. I walked into the resident lounge, coffee in hand, and found Dr. Hayes already there. "Morning, Claire," he said, glancing up from his notes. Morning, I replied, forcing a calm I didn't feel. He studied me for a second, nodding slowly. Big surgery today. You ready? Yes, sir. He gave me a rare approving look. Good. The day moved in a blur of rounds, charts, and or prep, but her name kept flashing in my mind. Sophie Anderson. At lunch I sat in the cafeteria scrolling through my phone, forcing myself to eat. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. Hey, it's Sophie. Can we talk later? Need your advice. XO. I put the phone down, my appetite gone. After the last surgery, I walked back to my office, pausing outside the door to gather myself before pushing it open. And there she was, sitting in my chair, legs crossed, scrolling on her phone like she belonged there. Hey Claire, she chirped, looking up, her eyes bright. This place is so cool. I closed the door quietly, placing my charts on the desk. You shouldn't be in here, Sophie, I said, my voice even, my hands steady. She rolled her eyes, getting up, walking around the office, touching the framed degree on the wall. I just wanted to see where you work, she said, flipping her hair back. You've really made it, huh? I stayed silent, watching her, the way she moved, the way she avoided looking at me directly. She turned, her smile fading, her voice dropping. Look, Claire, I really need this job. I said, nothing, waiting. She stepped closer, her voice soft. Mom and Dad cut me off. I have bills, debt. I don't have anyone else. We're sisters. I thought. Maybe you could talk to HR, make sure I get hired. She tried to touch my arm, but I stepped back, her hand falling. Her face flickered, hurt flashing for a moment before the smile returned. Please, Claire, she said, her eyes glistening. I just want to start over. I took a deep breath, the memories crashing in the cold hospital bed, the empty room, the pain, the loneliness. She had been celebrating while I lay praying to walk again. And now she was here asking for help as if none of it had happened. I nodded once, my face calm. I'll think about it. Her face lit up, relief washing over her. Thank you, Claire. You won't regret it. She grabbed her bag and left, the scent of her perfume lingering, mixing with the sterile air. I stood there for a long time, the hum of the hospital around me, the past and present colliding inside my chest. She didn't know how I survived that surgery, how I had clawed my way back to life. And she didn't know that the person she was asking for help was no longer the sister she once knew. I sat in the conference room, the hum of the overhead lights pressing against my skull. The HR manager, Linda, smiled politely as Sophie settled into the seat across from me, her portfolio clutched tightly in her manicured hands. She was dressed perfectly, hair curled, makeup flawless, the same way she looked in those graduation photos I once stared at from a hospital bed. Thank you for seeing me today. Sophie began, her voice sweet, confident. It means a lot. Linda nodded, flipping through Sophie's application. Your resume is impressive, Sophie. And your interest in patient care aligns well with our mission here. Sophie beamed, glancing at me for support as if we were allies in this room. She leaned forward, folding her hands delicately. I've always been passionate about healthcare. My sister Claire actually inspired me. She had a major spinal surgery a few years ago, and I was by her side the entire time, seeing how much the hospital staff meant to her recovery. I felt my jaw tighten, my nails digging into my palm beneath the table. She continued, her voice, steady, eyes glistening with carefully placed tears. That experience changed me. I realized I wanted to help people the way this hospital helped her. Linda smiled warmly. That's a beautiful story, Sophie. I could feel Dr. Hayes watching me from the corner of the room, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly. I cleared my throat, forcing a polite nod, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Sophie glanced at me again, her gaze pleading, as if reminding me to play along, to protect the image she crafted. Before I could respond, the door swung open. Emily stepped in, her scrubs slightly, wrinkled, her eyes locked on Sophie with a cold fire I had seen only in the OR during emergencies. Am I interrupting? Emily asked, her voice calm but tight. Linda looked up, startled. We're in the middle of, I know, Emily said, stepping forward and dropping a folder on the table. But I think you'll want to see this. Sophie's smile faltered, her eyes darting to the folder, then back to Emily. What is this? Sophie asked, her voice trembling slightly. Emily opened the folder, revealing pages of hospital records, charts, and notes with my name, dates, and doctor signatures. Sophie, Emily said, her voice steady, you told them you were by Claire's side during her surgery. These records show you never checked in, never visited, never called. Sophie's face paled, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I was there in spirit. Sophie stammered, her eyes flicking to me for help. Emily's gaze hardened. Spirit doesn't sign visitor logs. Spirit doesn't hold her hand when she's screaming from the pain of a spinal leak. Linda's smile was gone now, her lips pressed into a thin line as she flipped through the records. Sophie opened her mouth, closing it again, her eyes wide, her breath coming faster. Dr. Hayes spoke for the first time, his voice low, controlled. Sophie, we take honesty seriously here. If you lied on your application, we will need to investigate further. Sophie's lip quivered, her eyes blinking rapidly as tears finally slipped down her cheeks, real this time. I sat silently watching her crumble, the taste of something sharp and bitter rising in my throat. She looked at me, her eyes desperate, mouthing silently, please. But I stayed quiet, my face unreadable as the truth hung heavy in the room between us. Sophie shifted in her seat, her manicured fingers fidgeting with the strap of her designer bag as the silence stretched. Linda cleared her throat, her eyes flicking between us, sensing the tension. Sophie, we take integrity very seriously here. What exactly did you mean by caring for your sister? Sophie forced a smile, the kind she used on social media, bright but empty. I meant I supported her emotionally, during her recovery. It was really inspiring to watch her fight back, and it made me want to help patients feel seen. Emily's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing. That's not what you said 5 minutes ago. Sophie's eyes darted to me, looking for an ally, but I kept my face calm, folding my hands in my lap. Dr. Hayes interjected, his voice low but firm. Sophie, this is a hospital, not a place for stories to impress HR. We need honesty. Claire's medical records show she was alone during recovery. Sophie's lip trembled. I didn't mean to lie, I needed them to see how much I care. Emily leaned forward, her voice steady, cutting through Sophie's excuses. Your caring didn't include a single phone call during her stay. Sophie's eyes widened, tears welling, but her voice came out defensive. I was busy, okay? College was hard, and it was my senior year. Linda's eyebrows rose. Harder than your sister fighting to walk again alone. Sophie's shoulders sagged, and for a second the mask slipped. I didn't know it was that bad. My throat tightened, a mix of anger and the ache of old wounds. You didn't want to know. Sophie flinched, blinking rapidly. Mom and Dad said you were fine, that you were strong. Emily scoffed softly. They weren't there either. Sophie's tears finally fell streaking down her face as she wiped them away with shaky hands. I just need this job, Claire, please. Her voice cracked and the room went quiet, the fluorescent lights buzzing above us. I watched her, remembering the girl who once cried until she got what she wanted, who never had to clean up the mess she left behind. Linda's voice broke the silence. We will need to verify everything, Sophie. This interview is over for today. Sophie's head snapped up, panic flashing across her face. Please don't. Emily stood, gathering the documents. You used her story for your gain. That's not passion, that's theft. Sophie looked at me one last time, desperation in her eyes, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. I kept my gaze steady, my voice calm. You should have been there, Sophie. Her face crumpled, her hands trembling as she clutched her bag, backing away from the table. Dr. Hayes sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose, looking tired and disappointed. This is not how trust is built, Sophie. Sophie turned, stumbling toward the door, her sobs quiet but sharp in the sterile room. At the doorway, she paused, looking back with eyes red and pleading. Claire. I'm sorry. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every moment she hadn't been there. Sorry doesn't change the past. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. She lowered her head and walked out the door, clicking shut behind her. The room felt heavy, the air thick with everything unspoken, everything broken. Emily exhaled, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. She can't take this from you. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the closed door, the ghost of my sister's regret hanging in the air. For the first time I saw fear in Sophie's eyes, and deep down I knew this was only the beginning. They showed up at the hospital unannounced, standing in the hallway outside my office with tired eyes and wrinkled clothes that smelled like old cologne and airport coffee. Dad's hands were shaking as he held his hat, his eyes darting around avoiding mine. Mom's makeup was smudged, her hair pinned back in a messy bun, her lips trembling as she opened her mouth to speak. "Claire, can we talk?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I stepped aside, letting them in, shutting the door behind them. The silence stretched heavy as they stood in front of my desk, clutching each other's hands. Dad cleared his throat. "We flew in from Denver last night. We didn't know what else to do." I sat down, folding my arms, watching them. "What do you need?" Mom's eyes filled with tears. "It's Sophie. She's in trouble, Claire." I felt a flicker of something in my chest, but I pushed it down, keeping my face calm. "She's always in trouble." Mom winced, her hand reaching out toward me before dropping back to her side. "We sold the house, Claire. We used the money to pay off her debts, but it wasn't enough." Dad's voice was hoarse, defeated. "She's drowning, Claire. Credit cards, loans, everything. We thought maybe if she worked here, she could start over." I raised an eyebrow, leaning back in my chair. "You think a job here will fix decades of choices?" Mom's tears spilled, her shoulders shaking. "We failed you, Claire. We failed both of you." I felt my jaw tighten, memories flashing of birthday parties, missed scholarships, stolen hospital beds cold and empty while they smiled in graduation photos. "You didn't just fail, you chose her every single time." Mom sobbed, covering her mouth with her hand. Dad's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. "We know," he whispered. There was a knock, and Sophie slipped in, her eyes swollen, her hair tied in a messy ponytail, her hands twisting around each other. "Claire, please," she said, her voice barely a breath. "I messed up. I know that. But I need this job. I need to fix things." I stared at her, seeing the girl who once screamed until she got the biggest piece of cake, who once called me selfish while I lay in a hospital bed fighting to move my legs. "You didn't care then," I said softly. "Why now?" She sank to her knees, tears dripping onto the floor. "Because I don't have anywhere else to go. Because I was wrong. Because I'm scared." Dad's hand shook as he rested it on her shoulder, his voice cracking. "We're scared too, Claire." Mom dropped to her knees beside Sophie, her mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Please, Claire. We're sorry. We were wrong." The room was silent except for their quiet sobs, the air heavy with desperation and the weight of years lost. I swallowed, my heart pounding, the pain of every forgotten moment rising like a wave. "Sorry doesn't change the past." Sophie looked up at me, her eyes pleading, her voice breaking. "Please, I'm begging you." I looked at them, the three of them on the floor, waiting, hoping, terrified. They had come here for salvation, for forgiveness, for a second chance. And for the first time, they were the ones kneeling, waiting for me to decide if they were worth saving. Sophie's sobs were sharp, echoing in the office, her shoulders shaking as she clutched the edge of my desk like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "I can't breathe. Claire," she choked out. "Every day, the calls, the threats." I tried to keep up, but I couldn't. Dad closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose, his voice low. "We sold everything, Claire. The house, the car, even your mother's jewelry. We thought it would be enough." Mom wiped her tears, her hands trembling. "We were wrong, Claire. About everything." I leaned forward, my fingers steepled, watching them. "You were wrong when you chose her graduation over my surgery. You were wrong when you spent my scholarship money on her dance camp. You were wrong every time you called me strong just to leave me alone." Mom's face crumpled, her hands covering her mouth as she sobbed. "I know," she whispered, her voice shaking. "We were so blind." Sophie's eyes were swollen, red veins threading through them as she looked up at me. "You don't have to forgive me, Claire. I need a chance to fix this." My jaw tightened, memories of the cold hospital room, the empty chair beside my bed, the photos of them smiling at her graduation flashing through my mind. "You think a job will fix years of this?" I asked, my voice low, calm. Sophie's lips trembled. "No, but it's the only place I can start." The room was thick with silence, broken only by Sophie's ragged breathing and the ticking of the clock on the wall. I stood walking around the desk, standing in front of them. You want me to save you now, I said, looking directly into Sophie's eyes. She nodded, tears spilling. Yes. I glanced at Dad, his shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. Mom reached for my hand, but I pulled it back, shaking my head. You both let her become this, I said, gesturing towards Sophie. You let her believe she was owed everything while I had to fight for every breath. Dad sank lower, tears finally falling down his lined cheeks. We destroyed you both. Sophie dropped her forehead to the carpet, her sobs muffled. I'm sorry, Claire. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't care, but now I do. I swallowed, my throat tight, the pain of years pressing down on my shoulders. Sorry doesn't erase what happened. Mom's voice was a whisper. We know. We just want to make it right. I looked down at them, these people who had once towered over me, who had once told me to be quiet, to be good, to be strong. Now they were begging. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw them not as parents, not as a sister, but as people terrified of losing everything they had left. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said, my voice breaking. And I don't know if I want to. Sophie lifted her head, her face streaked with tears, her voice raw. Then let me prove it. Let me earn it. The air was heavy as I stepped back, letting their words settle. They knelt there, waiting, hoping, as the weight of every choice they made pressed down on us all. And I knew as I looked at them that whatever happened next, it would be on my terms. Dr. Hayes found me in the hallway the next morning, just outside the OR board, as I was reviewing the cases for the day. Long night, he asked, his eyes catching mine, gentle but firm. I nodded, rubbing the back of my neck. They want forgiveness. They want me to fix what they broke. He handed me a coffee, still warm, the smell grounding. Forgiveness isn't a gift for them, Claire. It's a gift for you. I looked down at the swirling liquid, feeling the heat seep into my palms. They chose her over me. They chose parties and photos while I was begging them to be there. His voice was steady. And you survived without them. You built your life without them. I swallowed, blinking back the sting in my eyes. Why does it still hurt? He touched my shoulder lightly. Because you're human. But don't let it own you forever. I nodded, letting out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, and we both turned toward the OR doors as the nurses prepped for the first case. Later that afternoon, I found Sophie waiting for me outside the resident lounge, her eyes red, clutching a worn handbag against her chest. Can we talk? She whispered, glancing around. I crossed my arms, keeping my voice even. Say what you need to say. She took a shaky breath. I messed up. I spent money I didn't have, trying to keep up an image I couldn't afford. Now everything's gone. They're selling the house. They're drowning because of me. I felt the words press against old wounds, but I kept my face calm. And you think working here will fix it all? Tears slipped down her cheeks. I need a chance, Claire. Just one. Please. I studied her, seeing the fear, the cracks, and the confidence she always wore. For a moment, she wasn't the sister who had stolen birthdays and quiet moments. She was just a scared woman who had never learned how to stand on her own. You will not work here, I said, my voice calm but firm. Her eyes widened in panic. Please, I have nowhere else. I held up a hand. You will start over, but not in my hospital. I've arranged for you to have an interview at the community hospital across town. You will start from the bottom, and you will not use my name to climb. Her lip trembled. You'd do that for me? No, I said softly. I'm doing it for me. She looked down, clutching the letter I handed her, her shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, Claire. I watched her, letting the silence speak, letting her apology hang in the air, without reaching to comfort her. As I turned to leave, she called out, her voice small. Do you think you can ever forgive us? I paused, hand on the door. Forgiveness isn't something you earn overnight. It's something I give when I'm ready. That evening, I scrubbed in for a spinal surgery on a teenage girl, her chart reminding me of the day I almost lost everything. As I guided the tools under the glow of the surgical lights, I caught my reflection in the monitor. I saw a woman who had learned to stand after being left to crawl, a woman who had kept going when no one showed up. I wasn't their burden anymore. I wasn't their afterthought. I was here in control, living, breathing, and free. I walked down the hallway, each step steady, each breath calm, the soft squeak of my shoes grounding me. Emily fell into step beside me, her clipboard hugged to her chest, watching me with those warm, understanding eyes. "You look different today," she said. I glanced at her, arching an eyebrow. Different how? Like someone who finally stopped carrying everyone else's mistakes. I let out a small laugh, letting it echo against the white walls. Maybe I have. At lunch, I sat by the window watching the snow fall outside, flakes melting against the glass. I thought of Sophie, of her tears, of her shaking hands clutching the letter I gave her that morning. She had tried to speak, to explain, but I held up my hand. "This doesn't change the past, Sophie," I told her. "But it can change your future. Don't waste it." Her eyes had filled with tears, but for once she didn't argue. She just nodded, clutching the letter like a lifeline. A part of me wanted to comfort her, to pull her into a hug like an older sister should. But another part of me, the part that had lain alone in that hospital bed, remembered the silence of being abandoned. That part of me stayed quiet. That evening I scrubbed in for surgery, a young man with a spinal fracture from a car accident. As I adjusted the light, I saw a glimpse of my reflection in the metal tray. The same brown eyes, the same sharp jaw, the same hands that once shook in fear, now steady, holding a life in them. As I guided the instruments, I thought of that little girl who had eaten cold bread while her sister laughed at a water park. I thought of the teenager who had given up her savings so her sister could attend summer camp. I thought of the young woman who had begged her parents to come only to be left alone. And I thought of the woman I was now standing in the OR, saving a life, her own life finally reclaimed. "Vital, stable," Emily's voice called out, breaking my thoughts. "Thank you," I replied, not just to her but to myself. When the surgery was done, I stripped off the gloves and walked out, the cold air of the hallway rushing over me. Dr. Hayes was waiting, arms crossed, that small approving smile on his lips. "Good work," he said. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Thanks for everything." He clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Remember, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means you're no longer letting it control you." As I left the hospital, I turned back for a moment, seeing the lights glowing in the windows, the place where I had grown, where I had suffered, and where I had healed. Home wasn't a place. It was this moment, this freedom, this breath. I pulled out my phone and opened the photo of Sophie holding the letter, tears in her eyes, the fear of losing everything finally making her see the truth. And I whispered to myself, "You're free." Have you ever been in a situation like this? Share in the comments.